The visual gameplay update initiative was a venture to modernize champions whose abilities and appearance were severely outdated in the hopes to not only make the champion look more fitting for the growingly contemporary landscape of the game, but to act on the newly garnered experience in champion design. Back when the game first came out, the goal was to simply pump out new characters at a high frequency to flesh out the roster, leading to champions being created almost every other week it felt like. Quantity over quality essentially. Even though most of the original cast was in desperate need of touch-ups, there were a few that, while antiquated, still felt pretty good from a visual and even gameplay point of view. And so the intent was to simply add a more novel and unique experience in playing them, giving rise to the class reworks that took place between 2015 and 2018. Among the assassin archetype, Talon was a champion that previously struggled from being a supposedly more one-dimensional copy of other assassins. Though his appearance, model, and whatnot were preserved, in my opinion, the updates to his abilities are on the same level of identity warping as actual VGUs, despite not being a VGU himself. For today's episode of the Rework Retrospective, we're going to be taking a look at Talon and how his retrofit might have been the watershed moment that accelerated mobility creep to the level it's at today. Just before we get into the video though, I want to give a shout out to an old friend of mine that you guys should be more than acquainted with by now. Opera GX, here to sponsor my channel once again. At this point, if you guys haven't seen them on my channel, you must either be new or I don't know what to tell you. Opera GX has been expanding more on their collaboration with Riot Games via the Riot Corner. As you guys know, they like to make things easier for you to check out all the streams and co-streams taking place for every single pro play game throughout the tournament season. They have a brand new Riot Hub wherein you can see a full calendar and timeline of current and upcoming matches along with where to check them out for your convenience. It even shows any and all official co-streamers if you're looking for someone entertaining to watch party with. Like always, to download it, all you have to do is install one of the official League of Legends or Arcane contest mods in the GX store, and the Riot Corner comes right along with it. League aside, there are tons of ways you can customize your browser with background music, keyboard sounds, color themes, wallpapers, and a range of other things to add your own visual and auditory flair to your browser made just for you. Appearances are not the only thing Opera GX can be used for though. It's accompanied by a built-in VPN and ad blocker, making it easy for you to bypass ads, trackers, or any attempts on your IP address and personal information. Now if you're still on the fence about whether to use Opera GX, I'll remind you that it comes with an all-in-one import tool, letting you sync your bookmarks, browsing history, cookies, and whatnot from your current browser into this one, while simultaneously being compatible with every Google Chrome extension. I've been using Opera GX myself basically ever since they sponsored me 5 years ago, and I always recommend using them. Definitely give them a try. Special thanks to Opera for sponsoring me for all these years, but for now, back on topic. Talon was one of the earliest assassins to be added to the game. While most people think of Zed or Rengar as opposed to Child of an Assassin, they actually came out relatively later than him, and when you look at the comparatively more sophisticated ability interactions of those two against Talons, you could start to understand why he was in desperate need of a rework. In every which way I can think of, Talon was a textbook example of an assassin, someone with incredibly high burst damage, good mobility, and tactical defensive tools that could be used to escape pressure. However, if you failed to successfully burst someone down or was caught in a bad spot, it would be just as easy to get rid of him as it was him getting rid of you. The problem was that early iterations of Talon's kit resulted in a very black or white experience, akin to a stat checker despite assassins being the last type of champion who should be such a thing. While there has to be a degree of guarantee in their moveset so as to allow them to reliably dispatch a priority enemy target, in the interest of fairness, there also had to be a measure of skill expression or conditional thing to avoid making them, again, a stat checker. You could see this on assassins even back in the day. Katarina, for instance, had a relatively weak burst rotation combo in that all she could do was QEW, which did do a fair bit of damage, but look at the ratios on her old QW and E. Quite underwhelming. The expectation was that her passive would hopefully kick in once or twice, letting her use each ability multiple times over. Then you had assassins who needed to land important skill shots like Zed, or be in the right situation to access the bulk of their pressure like Rengar and Kha'Zix. Point being, there had to be a modicum of circumstantial factors to create variance and distinguish between a good and a bad player. Talon, however, didn't have this. His abilities were about as point-and-click pray it kills you or else I die as it got. Passive was Mercy, causing his basic attacks to deal bonus damage to enemies affected by any kind of movement-based crowd control, slows, roots, stuns, what have you. and he had two ways to make use of his passive on his own. First, we had Q, Noxian Diplomacy, an empowered auto attack that did bonus damage and applied a bleed onto the target plus true side of them for 6 seconds. Rather unremarkable of an ability, but it would later become the basis of his new passive. Auto attack empowerments are fairly common to see in first generation champions, but they were also widely considered the least creative abilities in the game in the sense that they did nothing but let you hit your target again for more damage and an ancillary effect. More importantly, they were also kind of unproductive in that they didn't do anything except encourage people to walk up to each other and see who could outlast the other. Then we had Rake. Of all his basic abilities, Rake had the least amount of changes in concept. It was a volley of daggers in a cone in front that would come out then come back in, damaging enemies both ways. Different with this one compared to the new one was that there was no delay before the skill came back. It would come out then instantly return. However, its overall strike range was measurably shorter and the slow was also weaker. Nonetheless, it had a slow, usually enough for Talon to get a couple auto attacks in there for bonus damage. As someone who used to play old Talon, I actually preferred this one a lot more purely for the instant return and the wider AoE, making it overall good for poke and wave clear, whereas the present day Rake, while still good for clearing and a big reason for why Talon always has insane CS per minute, only serves to apply stacks of his passive. Either way, the fast projectile speed made this ability damn near unavoidable, meaning so far we had two virtually point-and-click attacks, Diplomacy and Rake. You should be able to piece together what's going on with them. The problem child of his old kit both for him and against him was this one though, Cutthroat. I say problem child because where it only is Q and W, you get the impression this guy doesn't really have a way onto his target. That all changes with this ability. Cutthroat was a point and click on a target within 700 units of Talon that had him blink directly behind them, slow them for a quarter second, and increase the damage he dealt to them for 3 seconds. So basically it was like a Katarina Shunpo but only for enemy targets. The quarter second slow was designed such that it was just enough time for you to get an auto attack's worth of passive damage increase on them. A typical Talon combo consisted of E, auto, W to slow them again so you can auto reset with Q, and then ultimate for full burst. Now, just a few interesting things to make note of. At one point in time, specifically prior to 4.17, rather than applying a very short slow, it used to apply a 1 second silence to his target, which would initially make you think that's a DPS loss on account of Mercy not activating from silences due to not being in tempo crowd control. To that I say, try to understand the implications of such a champion. Diplomacy, Rake, and Cutthroat. Q's a point-and-click auto, W's a quick burst of AoE damage, and E's a point-and-click blink. How would such a playstyle pan out? The answer was as cut and dry as you think it is. There was no nuance to Talon's assassination method whatsoever, hardly any skill expression even. There was only one way to go about his combo, and that was to blink behind his target, then press W and Q and auto. That was about it. Alternatively, you could gap close onto like a minion to get within range and then stealth your way in, but it's the same basic principle. With his basic abilities being practically all point and click, Talon, true to his champion select quote, lived or died by whether this one single combo could deal sufficient enough damage to kill his target, for if it couldn't, he was functionally useless. Frustratingly, the deck was stacked overwhelmingly in favor of successfully achieving a kill. Remember that silence is one of the deadliest crowd controls in the game because it's the only one that negates your ability to use summoner spells and items, not counting suppression. While rooted, for example, you could still activate Zhonya's Hourglass, or while stunned you could still use Exhaust or Barrier, but when silenced you can't use either of them, nor can you use any of your abilities. Given Talon's extremely fast combo of E, Auto, W, Q all being castable within half a second to a second, a 1 second silence effectively made Talon's entire kit unavoidable. There was no counterplay to it unless you preempted his approach. That is, if you could even see him coming. Shadow Assault was about the same back then as it is now, flaring out a ring of blades around him that dealt damage to all enemies hit, while making him fast and invisible for 2.5 seconds. Normally, you would use this after blinking onto your target to layer the full burst on them, but Talon could also open up with it to chase after his opponent and then blink onto them to have the converging blades deal damage instead. Either way, the DPS was extraordinary, but in a way that was unfair to deal with. Talon was the only assassin who had basically zero counterplay. I know most people complain about Rengar one-shotting you in the blink of an eye to be pretty overpowered, and it is, don't get me wrong. But it is possible to intercept him before he killed you. For Talon, other than your teammates peeling him off of you, if you were by yourself and Talon was within striking range of you, you had zero, and I repeat, zero chance of stopping him. He would blink onto you, silence you, then drop his entire combo on you, and on the infinitesimal chance you were still alive after all that, you were too injured to actually mount a counterattack against him. By all accounts, Talon was a stat checker assassin. Even after his silence was taken out and replaced with a very short slow, the overall issue with him was that he was just too fast at one-shotting you. Again, pretty much everything in his kit was point and click, so if you combine the damage of his Q stab, the Q bleed, both hits of W and both hits of ultimate, all of which were amplified by Cutthroat, you were staring at north of 1000 base plus 400% bonus AD and damage, more if you had Ravenous Hydra active. That kind of damage was often enough to break through even bruisers. Your only chance at beating him was to just be harder to kill, but you rarely had that opportunity considering Talon notoriously had one of the strongest early games of any assassin. The instant he got level 6, Talon could all-in you and basically just kill you right away. His playstyle consisted of something like this. He would be able to wave clear extremely easily by way of Rake being strong enough to one-shot the backline minions and maybe in their process harass you for a good amount of damage. After chunking you with a couple rakes, he would then beeline towards you and one-shot you just like that. The mental game wasn't much different. For all intents and purposes, Talon was a Rengar who didn't need a brush to jump on you, nor an ultimate for that matter. He'd be able to run around the map and look for people to point and click on and nuke with this entire combo. Cutthroat, no longer silencing, did little to actually address the root problem that was his point and click rotation. Said rotation also made it painfully difficult for players to turn a bad situation around on him too. As a stat checker, if Talon fell behind early game, he had no easy way to make up that deficit. No escape apart from running away with his ultimate, and rank was his only meaningful neutral tool. If he got engaged on, he really didn't have a reactive defensive tool. Also, if the enemy team was aware of his threat range, they could easily keep him far away from who he wanted to blink onto. 700 units isn't really all that much to work with unless they face check where he finds a decent blink. There simply weren't many ways to play Talon, forcing players to bank on his one singular approach for better or worse. So the goal for his gameplay update was to address both issues. 1. Give meaningful breathing room in his combo for his opponents to have agency in dealing with it, while 2. Adding more nuance to Talon's gameplay so he can have more opportunities to navigate a game. Suffice to say, they did a good job at both, even though it burns my mouth to admit it. Technically speaking, Talon's new gameplay is much healthier than his old one. Just hear me out, put down the pitchfork, put down the torches, put down the cotton candy. Just give me a minute. However, experientially, it was a lot more frustrating to deal with. From an offensive point of view, Talon still more or less had the same point-and-click burst combo he had before, where he would gap close onto a target and then unload on them. But they added some variance to it where the payoff was higher at the expense of not being guaranteed anymore. Noxian Diplomacy essentially took in Cutthroat by now becoming a gap closer in addition to this step. If he casted it while in melee range though, he'd be able to critically strike for 1.5 times more damage. Putting two abilities into one without any real drawback might sound overpowered until you realize the damage his Q did was measurably less than what his old Q did, since it no longer had the bleed, at least not innately. Rake was also adjusted to fire in a more narrow cone, but it could fly out much further. However, the daggers would hold out for a small bit of time before coming back, buying his target a brief window of opportunity to flash or dash or do something to get out. The challenge was ensuring you got the second hit, since barring his ultimate, you had to land his Q and both hits of his W to proc his new passive, Blade's End, a 3 ability mark detonation for massive damage over time. Talon lost a lot of innate DPS across his abilities to make room for his new passive, which, if and when activated, would allow him to potentially dish out more damage than his previous iteration was capable of, with the caveat being if you missed any one of his W hits, you cannot tap into this damage. With this new rake having a delay, the target would be able to, like I said, flash, dash, or simply move out of the way before the return volley connected. Funnily enough, for the first couple months or so after Talon got reworked, his passive was so strong that he actually had the strongest level 2 out of any champion in the game. Strong enough to where, and this became a meme, Riot released an official stat that pointed out Talon was responsible for 25% of all First Bloods in games that featured him, which if you think about it is insane, but it made sense. Q, W, passive, and Ignite could do like 800 damage at level 2 combined, so in a way, Talon was still notorious for having a near point-and-click one-shot combo in the early game. Now I'd be remiss to not mention the ability everyone wants me to, of course. Assassin's Path, Talon's new E. In my opinion, this was the start of mobility creep in League. Version 7 was around the time new champions and reworks were starting to push the envelope of what a champion was allowed to have in terms of mobility. Talon was one of the earliest examples of this. Assassin's Path allowed him to jump over walls. Notable about this ability relative to most other dashes was that it costed no mana and had only a 2-second cooldown per cast, with each section of terrain having an on-terrain cooldown. This gave Talon some of the best overall tempo in the game, a fact that remains true even to this day. He went from being one of the least mobile champions in the game to arguably number 1 for a time. This ability could be used offensively to parkour around the map to get close to your target, or it could be used defensively to retreat from enemy attack. It was often employed for both. Talon would jump over a wall, assassinate a target, then run away and jump over another wall. This very capability was what allowed him to become more of a jungler now compared to a mid laner, since jungle was all about tempo, and Talon had some of the best tempo bar none. You might be thinking, how is this a fair exchange? It feels like he got so much extra stuff without really losing anything. He has even more potential damage than before, multitudes greater mobility, and he still has the same gap closing and everything else added onto it. What was the trade-off? That's why I said technically they did a good job reworking him, but they did so in the most aggravating way possible. Talon's a frustrating champion to deal with. He can blitz you 100 to 0 from any angle and then run away just like that. But theoretically, he's actually one of the easiest assassins to deal with now, because playing him correctly requires a great deal of premeditation. Thematically, it's befitting of an assassin. You shouldn't be able to just unga bunga charge in, one-shot someone and then get out because you can. You should be required to plan your attack route, plan your execution, and plan your escape route. Good Talon players are careful to not overuse his parkour since they might need that wall later down the road to get out. He's a pretty macro-intensive assassin, whereas other assassins are more micro-intensive and can usually BS their way through stuff. Ever since he got reworked, Talon's been balanced to always have a 51 to 52% win rate, whereas most other champions are balanced around a 50% win rate. Yet simply by adding a delay in his basic burst combo, he went from someone you had no counterplay against to actually someone you have a fair bit of counterplay against. It may not feel that way considering a Fed Talon has enough burst to kill you even through armor, but he consistently averages a 52% win rate through sheer coincidence. He just happens to be a naturally really strong solo queue champion. That you rarely if ever see Talon played in pro play while he dominates solo queue should be emblematic of his dependence on disorganization to be successful. Or to put it all together, he's the best rework that everyone hates. It's a very successful gameplay update, but we despise it because it essentially greenlit the rampant mobility creep we've been dealing with for the past almost 10 years. What do you guys think about Talon? Do you also have this grudging respect for Talon as a champion design, or do you think he's a badly designed overpowered piece of garbage that should be reverted? Let me know in the comments down below. That'll be it for today, so if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Rework Retrospective episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.